She almost threw the cup away without reading it. That was how close it came. Nadia had already crumpled the receipt and dropped it in the bin by the door, already had her coat buttoned to the chin against the February wind, already was turning to push through the glass door of that small corner coffee shop on Delmar Street when something made her look down. The handwriting on the cup was not printed or stamped. It was real handwriting, done in black marker, the letters slightly uneven and crowded near the bottom of the white paper sleeve. She almost kept walking. The sidewalk was grey and cold outside. She had a 9 o'clock meeting she was already going to be late for. She read it anyway. The note said she looked like she was carrying something heavy today, that whatever it was, she didn't have to figure it all out before she got to where she was going. That one step was enough. The note was signed with a single initial. J. Nadia stood there for 7 seconds with the cup in her hand and the door half open and the cold air coming in, and something in her chest did a thing she had not felt in a very long time. It was not exactly comfort. It was more like being seen. She took a breath, let the door close behind her, and walked out onto Delmar Street into the wind. She did not know the name of the barista who had written those words. She did not know that the young woman who had stood behind that counter at 5:40 in the morning had not slept more than 3 hours the night before, had 2 children at home under the age of 7, and had written that note because she had looked up at Nadia's face as she called the order and seen something in the set of her jaw and the flatness behind her eyes that she recognized from the mirror. She had no idea that anything about that moment connected her to the person who had made her coffee. She would not find out for 11 months. Janelle Cooper was 29 years old when Nadia walked into her shop that February morning. She had been a barista at that Delmar Street location for 3 years, Tuesday through Saturday, always the opening shift, which meant arriving at 5:15 before the city was fully awake, before the buses were running at full schedule, before her neighbour Mrs. Atkins across the hall was up to watch the girls. The opening shift meant waking at 4:30. It meant getting Amara, who was 6, and little Cece, who had just turned 4 in January, dressed and fed and walked across the hall in the dark to the back apartment where Mrs. Atkins, who was 67 and moved carefully but never complained about it, would let them sleep another hour on her couch. The opening shift meant arriving at 5:15 and having the machines going and the board updated before the first customer came through the door at 6. It meant standing on her feet for 6 hours straight with a 15-minute break that she sometimes used to eat, the half a sandwich she had packed in a reused plastic bag at 11:30 the night before, and sometimes used to sit in the back near the stockroom in a folding chair that Roy kept there for exactly that purpose, with her eyes closed, not quite sleeping but getting the closest thing to sleep that a 15-minute break in a folding chair can offer. Then it meant catching the number 42 bus home in time to pick the girls up from school, and then dinner, and then reading time with Amara, and then getting Cece down, and then the hour after they were both asleep when Janelle did the things she had not been able to do during the day, the bill payments, and the notes to Amara's teacher, and the call to the insurance company about a claim from September that had not yet resolved. It meant paying Mrs. Atkins $40 a week out of a paycheck that, after taxes and the bus pass, left Janelle with about $310 to cover rent, food, the electric bill, and whatever Amara's school sent home with her in those white envelopes that Janelle had learned to open standing up because she could not sit down and open them. The coffee shop paid $11 an hour. With tips on a good week, it came to closer to $13.50 effective. Tips were not always good. Janelle had been doing the math in the margins of her life for 3 years, and the margins kept getting thinner. She did not talk about this at work. She laughed when her co-workers laughed. She decorated the specials board with neat chalk letters because she had a knack for it. And her manager, Roy, a decent man who ran the shop with genuine care, once told her she should think about going to school for design. She had nodded and thanked him and had not told him that school was not a thing she was able to think about from inside the life she was currently trying to hold together. She wrote notes on cups sometimes. Not every cup, and not as a policy. Roy did not know she did it, and she had never tried to make it a thing. She did it when something in her face caught her, when a person came to the counter and she could see, under the surface of the ordinary morning transaction, that they were using everything they had just to stand there and function. She had been that person enough times to recognize it without thinking about it. She wrote the note on Nadia's cup on a Thursday in February. She had written perhaps 30 notes in the 3 years she had worked the opening shift, and she had never seen any of them change anything she could observe. People took their cups and walked out into the morning. That was the nature of the thing. She did not write them expecting anything back. She wrote them because they were true and because she could. If someone had told her that particular Thursday morning that the woman who ordered the large oat milk latte with an extra shot, the woman who barely made eye contact and whose coat was a good coat but whose face was somewhere else entirely, would walk back through that door 11 months later and hand Janelle's life to her with both hands, she would have assumed they were describing a different story than the one she was in. Nadia Hayes was 41 years old, a senior architect at a firm with a beautiful name and a culture that had quietly been grinding people down for years without ever acknowledging it out loud. She had been at the firm for 14 years. She had a reputation for precision, for showing up when it mattered, for not making things difficult. She had given the last decade and a half of her professional life to a building on the 14th floor of a glass tower downtown, and the price of that had been a particular kind of invisible suffering that is hard to name and easy to dismiss because it leaves no visible mark. She had been to therapy 3 times in 2 years, and each time she had spent the first session explaining the situation accurately, and the second session saying yes, she understood the tools, and the third session describing why the tools were not landing, and then she had stopped going because the appointments were on Wednesday evenings at 6:30, and the Wednesday evening at 6:30 was also when her most important client calls came in, and she could not hold both things in the same hand. What the therapist, Dr. Willis, had told her before she stopped coming was blunt and clear. She told Nadia that she was not failing at her life, that she had organized her life around surviving it, and those were 2 different things, that there was a version of her life she had not yet given herself permission to want, and that was what they needed to find. Nadia had written those sentences in a notebook she kept in her work bag. She had looked at them on the bus sometimes going uptown in the early mornings, and then she had gotten off at her stop and gone inside and not looked at them again until the next morning. She had been carrying those sentences for 1.5 years when she walked into the coffee shop on Delmar Street for the first time in her life, because the place she usually stopped at was closed for a renovation and she was running early enough that she needed to kill 12 minutes somewhere warm. She did not, on that Thursday in February, have any idea that in 11 months she would own a small design consulting firm of her own. She didn't know that the revenue in its first year would be nearly 4 times what she projected on the yellow legal pad she would fill on a Sunday afternoon in April, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold beside her, finally giving herself permission to want the thing she had been pressing away for too long. She did not know any of it. She just knew that something in the handwriting on that cup had cracked a seal on something she had been holding down for a long time. She knew that she walked faster on the way to work that morning than she had walked anywhere in months. She knew that during her 9 o'clock meeting she had looked at the wall behind her managing director and thought, for the first time with real clarity, that she did not want to be here anymore. Not today, not in general. She kept the cup on her desk all day. She refilled her water glass from it twice. When she went to throw it away at the end of the afternoon, she stood over the recycling bin for a moment and then fished it back out and put it in her coat pocket. She still had it when she got home. If you have ever stood at the edge of a decision that would change your life and known it was the right decision, and not yet been able to jump, you know what the next 5 months of Nadia's life looked like from the inside. The cup sat on the windowsill of her apartment. She passed it every morning on the way to the kitchen. She did not think about it in the way you think about a goal or a plan. It functioned more like a kept object, the kind that holds a feeling without needing to be explained. What she was doing in those 5 months was giving herself permission in increments. She had been denying herself a particular kind of permission for so long that the permission itself was not something she could grant all at once. She had to give it in pieces, like easing weight onto a floor you are not sure will hold. First the writing things down, then the conversations with people she trusted, then, slowly, the conversations with people she had always kept at arm's length because having them would mean the decision was real. In March, she started writing things down. Not a business plan yet, just things she knew about what she was good at. Then, things she knew about what people in her field paid for when they were not getting it from the large firms. Then those 2 lists started to overlap in ways she could not ignore, and she let them. And she started talking to people she trusted about what it would mean, practically, to leave the firm and start something of her own. She had one long conversation in April with her oldest friend Ruth, who had left a corporate law practice 6 years earlier and now had a firm of her own and a dog and a garden, and what Nadia could only describe as a different relationship with Sunday mornings. Ruth told her what she always told her, which was simply that the timing would never feel right. You stopped waiting for it to feel right, and you went. In May, Nadia had lunch with a former client who had left her firm's roster 2 years prior, a woman named Patrice who had built a mixed-use residential development in the warehouse district and who, over salads, told Nadia flat out that she would have called her directly if she had had her personal number. Nadia wrote her personal number on a napkin and pushed it across the table. In July, she told her managing director she was leaving at the end of September. He looked at her for a long time and then said he had known it was coming. He didn't ask her to stay. That fall, she filed the paperwork for Hayes Design Consulting. She had 3 clients by October, one of whom was Patrice. She had 4 by the end of November. She was working from the second bedroom of her apartment, which she had cleared out and painted herself in a deep, dusty teal, the colour she had wanted on a room for years but had never gotten around to choosing. It was exactly the colour she had needed. She thought about the cup sometimes, in the way you think about a small thing that turned out to matter more than it had any reason to. She did not know who had written it. She did not know that the person who had written it was still at the same shop on Delmar Street, still arriving at 5:15 in the morning, still doing the math in the margins of a life that was getting harder to hold. By November, Janelle's margins had closed further, not opened. The electric company had sent 2 notices in the same month. The landlord had informed her that rent was going up $60 in January, bringing it to $910, which was not a number her math could hold for long without something else giving way. Amara needed glasses and had needed them for 3 months by the time Janelle could get to the optometrist, and when she sat in the parking lot outside the office for 10 minutes before going in, it was not because she was nervous about the appointment. She was arranging her face for what the deductible was going to say to her. She didn't write any of this on cups. She kept it inside the way she had always kept things, in the place she had learned to keep them. She showed up at 5:15. She steamed the milk and chalked the board and laughed with her co-workers and told Mrs. Atkins that everything was fine whenever Mrs. Atkins, who was perceptive about things she was not supposed to know, asked. When the tips were good, Janelle set aside $5 for the envelope she kept in the kitchen drawer, the envelope she was building up against the January increase. When the tips were not good, she did not take anything from the envelope. By November, she had $280 in it, and she knew exactly what that number could and could not do. The landlord called on a Wednesday to say that the building's electrical system needed repair work beginning December 14th. Tenants would need to be out for 3 weeks. He was sorry about the timing. He was not unkind about it, which made it harder in its own way. 3 weeks starting December 14th. Janelle sat on her bed after the call and did the math again. Slowly, the way you do when you're hoping the numbers will be different this time. They were not. $280 in the envelope. No family in the city except a cousin she had lost touch with 3 years ago. Her sister in Kansas City had 2 kids of her own and a husband on night shift, and a house payment that was already stretched tight. Mrs. Atkins did not have a second bedroom and was 67, and should not be navigating 2 small children through her apartment every night. The short-term rental options in the price range Janelle could access in December, on short notice in this city, were limited in ways that took only a few searches to confirm. She closed the browser and sat with the information for a while. Amara was at school. Cece was napping. The apartment was quiet in the way it was only quiet for about 2 hours in the middle of the day, and Janelle had usually used those hours to sleep or to handle something that needed handling, but on this Wednesday she just sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the window. The light outside was the flat white of a November afternoon in a city that had not made up its mind yet about winter. She looked at it for a long time, and then she got up and started dinner. She went to work the next morning and said nothing to Roy. She steamed the milk. She chalked the board. When she wrote on a cup that day, it was for a regular who came in every Friday, a quiet man who had recently told her his daughter had been accepted to a nursing program, and whose face had done something when he said it that he probably did not know it was doing. She wrote on his cup that his daughter was going to be someone's miracle someday, and that the fact that he was her father was the first reason why. She did not write it to feel better about herself. She wrote it because it was true. That was the kind of person Janelle was, and she had always been that kind of person, even in the months when it cost the most to be it. Nadia came in on the 3rd Friday of November. She had been stopping in on Friday mornings since March because one of her new clients was breaking ground on a project 3 blocks away, and she had fallen into the habit of walking the site perimeter early and stopping for coffee on the way back. She had not connected the shop on Delmar Street to the cup on her windowsill. She had never come back to this block after February, had returned to her usual place when it reopened, and only discovered Delmar Street again when the building site put it on her route. She ordered her oat milk latte with an extra shot. The woman behind the counter called it back and started working, and Nadia moved to the side to wait and looked around the shop and noticed the specials board. The hand lettering was careful and confident and original, the kind of lettering that knows what it is doing. She looked at it for a moment longer than she usually looked at a coffee shop board. The woman behind the counter set the cup on the counter and called Nadia's name, and Nadia reached for it, and then she stopped. There was writing on the sleeve again. She almost kept moving. She was not in a hurry this time the way she had been in February, but some older reflex nearly carried her out the door anyway, the way you sometimes pull back from a thing because you're afraid it will not be as good as the first time. The first one had mattered. She was not sure she was ready for this one not to. She read it. The note said she hoped that whatever Nadia was building was exactly what she had meant for it to be. Nadia stood completely still for one moment. Then she read it again. It was 10 words. It was the most accurate 10 words anyone had addressed to her in the year she had spent building something in a second bedroom at a kitchen table-turned drafting desk, the year of early mornings and client calls, and the particular anxiety of a person who has bet on themselves for the first time and is not yet sure the bet was right. Whoever had written this did not know any of that. And yet. She looked up at the woman behind the counter. "Did you write this?" The woman turned from the espresso machine and said simply that she did that sometimes, yes. Nadia said, "Did you write one on a cup in February? About carrying something heavy?" The woman looked at her carefully and said she didn't remember specific notes, but that it sounded like something she would write. Nadia said, "I kept it." The woman's face did something then that Nadia would think about later. It was not surprise exactly. It was quieter than surprise. It was the look of someone who had sent something out without knowing where it would go, receiving word years later that it had arrived. "I'm Janelle," she said. "Nadia." The line had 2 people in it, and the morning rush was not over, and neither of them was under any illusion that this was the time, and they both accepted that without saying so. Nadia took her cup to the small table by the window. She sat down and opened her notebook and did not write anything in it for a long while. She just sat with the cup in front of her, and the marker writing on the sleeve, and the particular feeling of a thing, closing a circuit that you had not known was open. She stayed for 40 minutes. When the rush thinned, she went back to the counter, and she still did not know what she was going to say until she said it. She asked about the lettering on the board, whether Janelle had done design work before the coffee shop. Janelle said she used to draw a lot but had never done anything with it. Nadia asked what kind of drawing. Janelle said spaces mostly, rooms. She would see a building on the bus and find herself thinking about what the inside could be, how it might breathe differently if a wall were moved, how a room could serve twice its purpose with a different window. Nadia held very still. She asked what Janelle's situation was like outside of the shop. Janelle did not usually answer that question honestly. She had a practice of not answering it honestly that she had maintained for 3 years. Something about the way Nadia asked it, without softening it or making it easier, made her answer it directly. "Not good," she said. Nadia nodded. She did not fill the silence with anything. She let it sit, and then she pulled a card from her notebook and set it on the counter and said that she ran a design consulting firm, that it was growing, and that she had been looking for someone to join part-time to start. Someone with an eye for space and a mind for how things fit together. She said she did not know if that was Janelle. It might not be. She would like to find out. Janelle looked at the card. She picked it up. She said she did not have a degree. Nadia said she was not asking about a degree. Janelle turned the card over once and set it beside the register and said, "Okay." That word cost her something. Not because she did not want to say it, because she had spent 3 years learning not to want things too hard, not to let hope take up too much room, not to open the compartment where the larger possibilities lived, because opening it and then having to close it again was worse than leaving it shut. Saying okay to something like this was choosing to open it, and she knew it. She called the number on the card the following Monday from her kitchen, while Amara was at school and Cece was down for her nap. They met twice in the week that followed. The second meeting lasted 3 hours. It covered Janelle's instincts about space, which were exact and original and entirely self-trained, built from years of looking at rooms and buildings from windows and from bus seats and from the corner of an eye while she was doing something else. It covered the 3-week displacement, which Nadia heard in full without rushing or softening it, and at the end of which Nadia made the offer. She had a spare bedroom in her apartment, it had a bed and a dresser and enough room for 2 small girls. She was not using it. It was Janelle's for the month of December for herself and Amara and Cece. No cost, just until the building repairs were done and they could go back home. Janelle said she was not going to let her do that. Nadia said it was going to be empty either way. Janelle said she did not know Nadia. Nadia said she had been watching Janelle work for 9 months. She knew the kind of person Janelle was from 5 minutes at a counter, from the notes, from the lettering on the board, from the 20 minutes she had held the line alone during a rush with a patience that other people could not have manufactured. She said she knew what she was looking at. Janelle was quiet for a long moment, the kind of silence that holds a real question. She asked why. Nadia said, "Because you handed something to me in February when you had no reason to and you did not know it would matter. I am just handing it back." The silence between them was full. It held the thread between them, the one that had been invisible from both ends until now, the one that had run from an early morning in February through a windowsill and a yellow legal pad and a building site and a card on a counter, all the way to this moment in a coffee shop on a Friday in November when the thread came clear at last. Janelle said, "Okay." She and Amara and Cece moved into Nadia's spare room on December 14th. Amara immediately asked to see the room where Nadia worked, meaning the second bedroom with the drafting table and the sample boards pinned to the wall, and she stood in the doorway and looked at it with the focused seriousness of a child who has already made up her mind, and said that her mother should work there. Janelle told her it was someone else's house. Amara said, "But she should." She was right about that, as it turned out. They were back in their apartment in January. By then, Janelle had started working 10 hours a week for Hayes Design Consulting, mostly evenings and on Mondays, doing space plans and board prep, and the kind of visual groundwork that a 2-person firm needs someone with an original eye to handle. By February, it was 15 hours. By March, when Roy accepted her 2 weeks' notice with genuine warmth and said the board was going to suffer without her, it was 22, and her hourly rate was more than double what the opening shift had paid. She kept one Tuesday shift through the end of March because she had worked at that shop for 3.5 years and there were people she would miss, and she was not someone who left things without finishing them properly. On her last day, Roy brought out a small cake with blue icing that said, "Next Chapter," which was a little on the nose but came from a real place, and her co-worker Damon gave her a hug that lasted long enough to mean something and told her she was always too good for a job that started before the birds. She took a picture of the specials board before she left. The lettering was still hers. By the following fall, Hayes Design Consulting had brought Janelle on full-time as a junior design associate. She had a salary that was more than she had ever made in her working life. She had health insurance with a vision plan, and Amara got her glasses in October, blue frames she had chosen herself, and wore them with a combination of self-consciousness and pride that was one of the most specific and beautiful things Janelle had ever watched. The firm had outgrown the second bedroom by September and moved into a shared studio space 4 blocks from Delmar Street. Nadia had chosen the space in part for the ceiling height, in part for the north light, and in part for the fact that she could see the corner where the coffee shop sat from the studio window. There was paid time off for the first time in Janelle's working life. There was a Monday in October when Janelle did not have to wake up at 4:30 and she lay in bed, listening to the quiet, and could not at first understand what was missing, and then understood that nothing was missing. She was simply resting. That was a thing she was allowed to do now. In late October, a message came through on Janelle's phone from a number she did not have saved. It was a photograph of a paper coffee cup with a white sleeve and marker handwriting on it. The handwriting was hers. The message with the photograph said simply that the sender had been moved by the note and had not known why until recently, and that they hoped Janelle was somewhere good. It was signed "A Stranger on Delmar." She showed the photograph to Nadia, who looked at it and then looked at Janelle and said it sounded about right. Janelle looked at the image for a long moment and then set her phone down and went back to what she had been working on, which was a preliminary space plan for a community health clinic the firm had just been hired to redesign. The clinic served the neighborhood where Janelle had grown up. Her mother still lived 6 blocks from it. The nearest medical facility after this one closed its evening hours 2 years ago was 40 minutes by bus, which was 40 minutes that a working mother with a sick child and a 6 o'clock shift and no car did not always have. She was going to get this building right. There was a window on the north wall of the proposed clinic layout that the previous designer had treated as a utility space, walled off, no natural light. Janelle had studied the footprint for 3 minutes and then moved a partition 6 feet east and put a skylight in the ceiling above the waiting area. It changed the entire quality of the room, the way light changes a room, not just in the literal sense, but in the sense of what the room says to the person sitting in it. A waiting room with a skylight says that someone thought about the person who would be sitting here. A waiting room without one says the opposite. She understood that the people who would sit in that waiting room were people who had limited time and no good options, and were there because the bus ran nearby and they could not afford to be anywhere else. And what she wanted the room to say to them was something different. It was a structurally small change. It cost what a skylight costs. When she showed the amended plan to Nadia, Nadia looked at it for a moment and said one word, quietly. Yes. That was the kind of eye Janelle had. It had always been there, behind the opening shifts and the bus pass and the envelope in the kitchen drawer. The eye that looked at a space and understood what it could become if you just moved one thing, if you let the light in from the right direction. The same eye that had looked up from an espresso machine at 5:40 in the morning, on a Thursday in February when the city was still dark, and seen a woman whose face was carrying something heavy and had reached for the marker without stopping to think about whether it would matter or what it would set in motion. She had known, on some level below calculation, that it would matter to someone. She had not known to whom or when or in what form the matter would resolve itself into her own life. That is not how kindness works. It does not come with a map of its own return route. It goes where it goes and takes the time it takes, and eventually, in the form the story needed it to take, it comes back. Have you ever said something small to someone and then forgotten about it completely, and years later discovered they had been carrying it the whole time? The things we throw into the world without thinking tend to travel further than the things we plan. Leave a thought below. Janelle drove herself and the girls to her mother's house for Thanksgiving that year, which she had not been able to do the previous 2 years because the car had needed repairs she could not afford, and the holiday bus schedule did not run to her mother's neighborhood. The car was a 2017 she had bought in August from a lot on the east side, nothing new, just over 90,000 miles, and the driver's window was slow coming down, but it started every morning, and the heat ran properly, which was what mattered in November. And Amara had sat in the back seat on the drive home from the lot and declared it, without hesitation, a good car. Her mother stood on the front porch when they pulled up and watched them come up the walk. When Janelle reached the top step, her mother took her face in both hands the way she had done since Janelle was small, looking at her the way mothers look at their children when they are reading something larger than anything a face can fully say. And then she said that Janelle looked rested. Janelle said she was. She actually was. Her mother nodded the way she nodded when something she had been waiting a long time to hear had finally been said. She let Janelle go inside. Amara ran straight for the kitchen and announced she was going to help with the pie crust, and Cece followed because Cece followed Amara everywhere, and the house filled with the kind of noise a family makes when everyone is warm and no one is afraid of what comes next. Janelle sat at her mother's table and had a cup of coffee and thought about all the things she had not been able to see from inside the years she had been living them. She had not been able to see that the opening shift had carried its own kind of dignity, had given her mornings of a quality she would not have traded, had put her in the same room as hundreds of people. At the exact moment, each of them needed something warm and simple and given without condition. She had not been able to see that the notes on the cups were not small things. You cannot see the size of something when you're standing inside it. She had not been able to see that the woman who would eventually hand her a different life had stood at the counter on a February morning looking like someone using everything she had just to remain upright. She had not been able to see it. She had written the note anyway. The instruction in that, if there is one, is not complicated. You do not need to know that something will matter for it to matter. You do not need to understand the distance a kindness will travel before it finds where it was always going. You just need to do the thing that is in front of you to do because you can see it and because you can do it, and then You let it go. Nadia kept the original cup. It lived now on the windowsill of the studio, moved from the apartment when they took the new space. Over the months, the paper had faded slightly in the light, and the marker had gone a little grey where the morning sun hit the sleeve, but the words were still legible if you looked at them directly. Cece came into the studio sometimes on Saturday mornings when Janelle had work to finish and Amara had practice. She had adopted the studio with the easy authority of a 4-year-old who has decided a space belongs to her, and on a Saturday in November she stood at the windowsill and looked at the cup for a long time with the focused expression she used when something did not quite make sense to her. She asked what the cup was for. Janelle said it was where things had started. Cece looked at it again. She said it was dirty. Janelle laughed. A real laugh, the kind that starts in the chest and does not have to be managed or maintained, the kind she had not been able to produce very much of during the years when all her energy was going toward holding the margins. She told Cece she was right. It was a little dirty. She left it on the windowsill anyway. In the late afternoon, when the work was done and the studio was quiet, the light came through the white paper sleeve and threw a faint shadow on the wall behind it, the ghost of a cup. The shape of a thing that had been nearly thrown away and was not. It sat there in the quiet after they had both gone home, in the blue evening light of a studio that had been built on a decision made slowly, and a note written quickly, and a thread that had run between two people without either of them knowing it for 11 months, holding nothing but the memory of a morning when a woman who was almost out of margin looked up from her work and decided to write something true on a cup that someone almost did not read. That was all it had ever been. It had been enough.